So Sun Valley is this media, I keep calling it absurd. It is absurd. This media summit where the great minds of the media industry all meet and hang out at this resort in Idaho.
Anna Nicolaou is the U.S. media correspondent for the Financial Times.
And so Bob Iger was there as ever this past summer and was doing an interview.
This was with financial news channel CNBC.
So is it more challenging than you'd anticipated? Is the business sort of more challenged than when you returned late last year?
Yes.
It was one of the interviews where effectively he started to kind of publicly state an uncertainty that we really hadn't seen from him in the past.
It doesn't mean that I am any less enthusiastic about the opportunities, and nor am I less enthusiastic about the company. In fact, the opposite. I'm extremely optimistic about the company and its assets, and we should talk about them.
We will.
But I would say that in some cases the challenges are greater than I had anticipated.
This was Disney CEO Bob Iger, the same Bob Iger who resigned from the company in 2020, only to reinstate himself 2 years later, booting out the executive he'd hand-picked to replace him.
I think a year ago when he came back, it was kind of this, like, thank God moment for everyone in Hollywood. And then over the summer, particularly at Sun Valley, and then in kind of ensuing interviews around that time, he started to really make comments that took me by surprise. I think a lot of people by surprise, saying that, things are worse than I thought. Saying that all options are on the table with the linear TV networks. So I think maybe that moment when he was saying out loud what most of the time CEOs will just never say out loud, for Iger himself to say that things were worse than he thought, I think that was a big moment for the industry where reality was setting in.
The man who is commonly referred to as the King of Hollywood was admitting, even declaring, that times were tough at Disney. Bob Iger had played an outsized role in growing the entertainment conglomerate to be the biggest media company in the world, and now he was considering offloading some of its once beloved assets.
Let me ask you about it. We're talking, I guess, ABC, the network, the stations, but then the cable networks as well.
Yes, correct.
FX, Nat Geo. Is it possible you would look to sell them?
We're going to be expensive. I think if you can interpret what that word means. We're just getting at that work, but we have to be open-minded and objective about the future of those businesses.
This is The Closer. I'm Amy Keene. The Disney we know today came about in a series of game-changing deals. It bought Pixar, Marvel, Lucasfilm, and more recently, 21st Century Fox. But before all of this came a deal that set the mold for how the company would grow, a 1995 bid for TV network ABC. On this episode, the deal that kickstarted the Walt Disney Company's transformation from a theme park and animated film business to one of the largest companies in the world, and the challenge this deal poses for the business today.
We kind of came full circle, right? Where you now have Bob Iger trying to get rid of the asset that he was a part of and kind of built his career on. So we're seeing this kind of the life cycle of television.
We'll be right back. Anna Nicolaou has one of the coolest jobs in business journalism.
So I write about the financial side of Hollywood, music, TV, film, as well as news companies, occasionally publishing. It's a pretty wide-ranging beat, but it's basically the money of these fun, creative industries in the U.S.
For people who might not understand the way this particular industry works, how do you see it? How do you kind of make sense of what you're covering?
My era in this has been first the bubble and now the bust. So
Of streaming,
and I guess Hollywood more broadly. So, like 2018, 2019, 2020 into the pandemic was this kind of bizarre, like, money means nothing. We're just going to make every possible TV show imaginable. Who cares? And it was just all fun. And now the past year or two has been this very inevitable, but for some reason still coming as a surprise, reckoning with that and kind of bringing back to reality. I'm looking at kind of the big corporate stories in this world.
Many of those stories look at one company in particular. That's Disney. And that's because until recently, it was one of the largest companies in the world. But just a few decades ago,
Disney was just a much, much smaller company before this. They were in the 80s, it was just kind of a few theme parks.
Welcome to our magical tour of the world's #1 family vacation destination, Walt Disney World.
And the movie studio, the 90s, they kind of hit their stride with a lot of these huge movies that are still being remade today, right? So The Lion King and Aladdin and Beauty and the Beast. It was kind of a much smaller company, but a lot of the same, I think, cultural bits of it were consistent, right? It was, I think, culturally, internally, it's always kind of been this, I don't know if cultish is the word, but it's an intense culture, right? Like, they really believe in it, that everything kind of runs through these ideas of, make-believe and magic and this American idealism that's been around since they started. And at the time, the CEO, Michael Eisner...
Michael Eisner has been called the most powerful man in Hollywood. He heads the world's second largest entertainment company with the world's most recognizable mouse. He has been chairman and CEO of the Walt Disney Company since 1984.
People respected him and thought he was quite smart and creative.
Started talking to Sid, and I said, would you like to know why I should be the chairman of the Walt Disney Company? He said, yeah, I'd love to know. The company should be run from a creative point of view rather than a financial point of view.
But he was also known to be very paranoid and kind of constantly jockeying for power and kind of set this very intense, high-pressure culture at Disney.
He also saw an opportunity for the company beyond its core divisions. He wanted to get into the TV business, and with one TV brand in particular.
From ABC News World Headquarters in New York, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
Good evening, everyone. We begin tonight.
ABC was this massive, big broadcaster at a time when that meant a lot, right? When the broadcast TV channels, that was entertainment itself.
ABC was, at the time, owned by a company called Capital Cities, and Capital Cities also had a few other media properties. But Eisner was focused on the TV business.
I think he saw this massive opportunity. At the time, ABC was, I think, the most popular TV channel, and it had this huge, I remember as a kid, like, watching it every Friday night, but they had it was the TGIF lineup.
It's Friday night. Stay tuned for a whole new season of TGIF.
And you would watch, I think it was Full House.
You got it, dude.
Family Matters.
Did I do that?
Some other show where there's a roller coaster they're on in the theme song.
Oh, Step by Step.
Step by Step.
Step by step, day by day, a fresh start over, different hand to play.
You basically had the very, very family-friendly home of television. And then you had Disney that had this wildly successful movie studio, but wasn't really fully in TV in any big way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they saw just the amount of money TV was making at the time.
TV offered two big things that theme parks and movies couldn't. The first was advertising revenue. The second was the cable business. More and more households were opting to watch cable channels over the traditional broadcast networks, which meant steady monthly revenue for the companies behind those channels. But Eisner couldn't quite build a TV business from scratch.
I think he saw, okay, we know what we're doing in terms of movies and the brand itself, and they had done a bit with television in terms of making, cartoons based on the Disney characters, for example. But they weren't really in earnest. And I think even in kind of simple ways, Eisner was seeing like, oh, we can promote Disney movies on ABC's TV channel where however many millions of Americans are watching it every single day, right? So it was kind of a classic thing where buying was a lot easier than creating your own. I mean, it would have been a really, really tall order to build what ABC was at that time.
The story of how Eisner bought Capital Cities ABC takes us back to that media conference Anna told us about at the top of the show, Sun Valley.
Which is this kind of absurd media conference that still happens today every summer, where basically really rich, powerful executives in media and now tech all go to this resort town in Idaho and hang out amidst some beautiful mountain scenery and talk about deals, basically.
Only this one was about 28 years earlier, in the summer of 1995.
So at the time, Warren Buffett was the big shareholder of Capital Cities ABC. And the story is that he just ran into Michael Eisner at Sun Valley and they started chatting. And I think they had talked about it before because it was actually, in retrospect, a very obvious combination. It was the big family network of TV and then the big family studio of movies, right? So you could definitely see why it would make sense to put them together. But that was, I guess, the meeting and the conversation that actually led to a pretty quick, I think it was only a couple of weeks after that they were able to strike this.
The largest media deal ever was announced today. The Walt Disney Company is buying Capital Cities ABC, the parent company of the ABC television network. The merger is valued at about $19 billion. The new company will be run by Disney's chairman, Michael Eisner.
In business news, a Triangle television station got a new owner today as the result of Walt Disney's $19 billion takeover of Capital Cities ABC. The takeover, announced this morning, is the second largest in history.
At the time, $19 billion, even today would be a big deal, but in the 90s, it was one of the biggest deals ever.
The deal brought the profitable ABC network, the sports cable channel ESPN, as well as Disney's theme parks and movie business all under one corporate roof, so to speak.
It expanded the company dramatically just in terms of scope and size, right? It went from kind of fairly narrow lanes of these are our brands and this is what we do, and all of a sudden it's this massive kind of diversified media company. It was the early iteration of this Disney that we have come to know in our lifetime, right? Where it's just this like omnipresent entertainment giant.
I want to get into another element of what came with the ABC acquisition, which is this sports brand called ESPN. Do you have any sense that Disney understood the value of what it was getting with ESPN when it acquired ABC Capital Cities?
I think Disney would like to say that they knew, of course, that ESPN would become what it became because they would want to look smart. I don't know that anyone could have really predicted just how big cable would become, like in terms of sheer profits. And ESPN was kind of the face of that for more than a decade.
This is SportsCenter.
What made ESPN so special was a devoted fan base, of course, but also what it could charge the cable companies who then pass that cost along to cable customers in their monthly bill. It was several dollars more per month than the cost for most other channels. For Disney, that meant steady and reliable revenue.
ESPN was the crown jewel, undoubtedly, and it really, I don't think modern Disney would be able to have become what it was without ESPN.
This channel and its steady, reliable revenue would fund the ambitions of a new Disney CEO. We'll be right back. For Disney, bringing in ABC and the other Capital Cities brands also meant bringing on a young executive who would eventually make his mark at the company, Bob Iger.
I don't get the sense that anyone at the time thought that they were getting a big asset in Bob Iger at the time. It's funny looking back on it now and kind of reading the stories about it, and just the narrative around it at the time was that Iger was this guy who had worked at ABC and had been a weatherman, and I think people viewed him as a safe choice. He was, kind of proven. He'd been at ABC for a while.
Here's Iger in a 2020 interview with Bloomberg.
Michael Eisner approached us and made an offer that not only we felt we couldn't refuse, but we thought was in the best interest of the shareholders of the company. Turns out we were right. And look, in the back of my mind, even though Michael made it very, very clear that there was never going to be a guarantee, I thought if I played my cards right, if I performed well, I could potentially run the Walt Disney Company.
He had kind of played the game with Eisner, and Iger was basically, for a decade, kind of working up to being the chosen successor under Eisner. And so he, to his credit, did kind of rise to the top. I think the main difference between Iger and Eisner was that Iger has this charm to him that Eisner did not. Bob Iger was viewed as a much more kind of gentle, nice person. I don't know if nice is the word, but he knew how to talk to people, I guess is what I'm saying. Eisner would get in these massive public battles with the Disney family and Steve Jobs and like people you don't actually want to be in a fight with, right? He was known to be quite combative, whereas Iger, I think probably Iger's biggest success has been his kind of finesse with people. And he's really proven the value of being able to kind of talk to anyone and convince them to do what he wants, right? Mm-hmm. But no, at the time, I don't think anyone thought, oh, we're going to buy ABC because Iger is this great executive. If anything, Eisner didn't want anyone that good to come in and dethrone him. So it was kind of in spite of that Iger rose through the ranks.
In 2005, Iger became chief executive of Disney, and he got to work on a series of big acquisitions to grow the company into an entertainment powerhouse.
Pixar was the first big Bob Iger acquisition. Pixar was 2006. Marvel was the next one in 2009. Then you had Lucasfilm a few years later. And those were kind of the big three for Iger, where, you know, for Eisner, ABC was his big swing that grew Disney into a much, much, much bigger thing than it had been. For Iger, those three were really his career-defining, legacy-making decisions. And then the last big one under Iger's first tenure was Fox.
We got a deal. Disney's buying Fox's film and TV assets.
And that was a $70 billion deal that he paid to Rupert Murdoch in 2019. ABC was kind of the first big one. Eisner was the mastermind behind that, of course. And he really, and when you think about it, it makes sense because Bob Iger was learning from Michael Eisner. He was a lieutenant who was kind of watching this all unfold and seeing how much Disney had grown by paying a lot of money to buy another company, right? So it's not a total shock when you look at it that way. But I think those two executives really embodied this kind of, I don't know if brave is the word, but bold strategy where you take big swings and hopefully it works out. And it did work out for a long time. It did work out to up until, I guess, 5 years ago.
5 years ago, when, according to Anna, Disney was seen as an unparalleled power in Hollywood.
It was, I don't know, analysts say things like firing on all cylinders, but it was just like the execution was just kind of impeccable, right? Like, so Iger kind of embodied this swagger for Disney where, yeah, they were the studio to try to beat. They were dominating the box office completely with these, I mean, Marvel at that time was just, every movie was making $1 billion, right? Even as the industry was changing, Disney then and still now, I think, has always been viewed as, well, this is the traditional media company that's going to make it through this massive storm.
The massive storm Anna's talking about is the radical shift in how we consume our favorite TV shows and movies. From the cable bundles and movie theater tickets we used to buy to the digital streaming platforms we subscribe to today. Even for Disney, this shift, or massive storm, is becoming increasingly tough to navigate. Today, the entertainment giant is at a crossroads. Disney and Bob Iger have to figure out what the company is going to look like in a new era of media and entertainment.
So Disney and all of its peers are dealing with the fallout from streaming.
Just ahead, the new battle in the streaming wars as a Hollywood giant jumps in but gets off to a rough start. We'll tell you what it means.
By fallout, I mean Netflix came along, offered a product that was much more enticing to people than cable was in a lot of ways. So I think Netflix stole a lot of customers, and companies like Disney spent, many years watching this slowly happening and probably, wondering what they should do and should they abandon this business that has been so wildly profitable for them. That's just hard to kind of let go of, I think, even from an emotional standpoint.
This is being the cable business.
Yeah, cable and even broadcast just TV in general, right? You have someone like Iger who, came of age with television, built his career with TV, he himself became very rich from TV. These executives made a lot of money from TV, right? And so Iger obviously has an affinity for ESPN and even ABC. And so they're reckoning basically with, they tried to copy the Netflix model. Netflix is now a household name that a lot of people are just used to now, which is kind of funny, because it's now kind of the incumbent in this new market that it created.
That's the Netflix effect, or the technological shift in how most of us watch TV and movies. But Disney and other media companies are also contending with a new macroeconomic picture, too.
So Netflix was able to do all of this and lose a lot of money for a long time at a time when it was kind of fine, or at least that's
when money was cheap.
When money was cheap, when the stock market was booming, they were paying for making television with debt at a time when it was pretty cheap to do so. And so they were given a lot, because of all this, they had a lot more flexibility than Disney has now. Mm-hmm. So Disney and all of its peers are dealing with the situation where they're losing billions of dollars a year from streaming, because streaming in its current iteration is nowhere near the profitability of cable. So they're losing money from streaming. They have these TV channels that are just kind of slowly, awkwardly dying. But they're still making money, so you don't want to just throw them away entirely, because you're still getting, I forget what it was, ESPN's still making like $15 billion a year or something like that. So you don't want to obviously just like throw it out, but it's in existential decline. So you're managing these two things at the same time as the broader stock market has been down, interest rates are going up and up and up. I think Disney and all the media companies are just kind of at a point of not knowing what to do. And that's been a big theme of this past year, for the first time in his career, or his the past few decades, it seems like Iger does not know what to do.
Even Iger doesn't know what to do.
It's kind of hard to fathom the difference. Even 3 years ago or 4 years ago, Iger was viewed as kind of this immortal figure, right? Where a year ago, when he came back to Disney to kind of save the day, people were very, very happy and relieved. It was this sense that, oh, okay, like this grown-up that knows what they're doing is going to come back and save us all. And he kind of left on a high note, right? He staged his own exit very well, where he left literally a month before the pandemic. And at the time, Disney had this streaming service that had 100 million something subscribers. And the view was just, great job, Bob. Like, great sign off. And now you have Disney in just such a different place.
Bob Iger's got to do one heck of a job in righting this ship, because that stock is trading close to a 10-year low.
Well, look, Bob Iger has been under massive pressure, the Disney stock at a multi-year low recently. And we know as well, Bloomberg's just reported about the subscriber pressures that Disney Plus is under, potentially going to fall tens of millions of subscribers short of its 2024 target.
People are quite frustrated. Investors are quite frustrated. They've had 3 different activist investors kind of set their sights on Disney in the past year and a half or so. Disney has basically come to embody all of the problems that traditional media companies are facing right now, because they're the biggest.
This takes us back to Sun Valley, the media conference in Idaho, for a third time this episode. Back to this past summer when Bob Iger, the king of Hollywood, said the way to get through this difficult period might be to give up some of the once prized assets in its portfolio, the very assets that fueled his growth spree.
Right. Well, we've been having this conversation for a very long time.
Well,
now,
I think what I'm saying
in terms
is
of the
it's
erosion
time.
of the linear business,
Yeah.
and now it's kind of closer to obsolescence.
Well, as I said, when I came back, one of the things I discovered was that the disruptive forces that have been preying on that business for a while are greater than I thought.
What are they looking to possibly do with both ABC and, within that, ESPN?
Yeah, that's the kind of $100 billion question that everyone's trying to figure out. Bob Iger has thrown out a number of thoughts publicly.
The noise had always been for a little while that maybe this would be an asset for Disney to dispose of.
Right. Well, if you remember, this started in July when Bob Iger said that, maybe these traditional channels were no longer core to the business. And that set off a frenzy.
I think the problem is he doesn't seem to know what he wants to do. So he's kind of floated that all options are on the table for the traditional TV channels like ABC. He's floated that, they might sell a stake in ESPN. ESPN itself has become kind of a problem in that there are very unique challenges to adapting sports to streaming that don't exist for scripted TV, for example, where ESPN is paying, or Disney is paying, enormous amounts of money for the rights to air sports. Their costs are enormously high, and streaming itself at this point does not make that much money for Disney. So just the math does not add up for ESPN in the way that it has maybe for, Disney Plus or Hulu or whatever it might be. So you have this ESPN problem, and because of, I think, just the sheer financial issue, Iger is now looking at finding a, quote, partner to come in and kind of offset some of the challenges and buy a stake in ESPN.
So you said you talked to some people involved in these
I
conversations.
talked to some people involved in these conversations, and I remember talking to them, 3 years ago, and people would say they should have sold ESPN 5 years ago, right? There's an argument that you've already missed the boat in terms of selling ESPN at the top. ESPN is still obviously making a lot of money, has a lot of subscribers, but it's kind of like a melting iceberg. You're buying something that is in decline, and it's very unclear what its future is going to be under streaming. But yeah, there is kind of this bizarre full circle moment where ESPN was definitely one of Iger's favorite things, right? It was his big moneymaker for most of his tenure at Disney, and now he's trying to figure out what to do with it.
Disney is, yes, at its own crossroads. But changes at Disney will have wide-reaching effects on Hollywood and the media landscape more broadly.
I think Hollywood is always going to have that kind of glamorous side to it. I don't think a lot of people have been talking since the strike that we're just entering this much grimmer era in general. And I think that is true to an extent.
Anna's talking about the writer's strike and the actor's strike that just recently resolved.
But I don't see it losing its appeal or its kind of magic in the next 5 to 10 years. I think it'll just be a case of different people owning these companies. But I think, the big problem is, Iger is the king of Hollywood. He has definitely been, if there's one person who's kind of dominated the industry and embodied the industry for the past few decades, it's him. And it is not clear who would succeed him, as we know, as he knows. There isn't a clear, next generation of people that are going to take over. There isn't, one tech executive, for example, that people think could really turn things around. So, he's been the king of Hollywood. He now has a very unglamorous task of dismantling, in some ways, the empire he built and trying to find someone that can replace him. And I think that's kind of at the heart of his challenge right now is it's unclear what's going to happen. I really couldn't tell you what Iger is going to look like 5 years from now.
That's the end of this episode, but there's much more from my conversation with Anna coming to Brazen Plus subscribers on Apple Podcasts later this week. The Closer is a production of Project Brazen in partnership with PRX. Our show is produced by Isabel Kirby-McGowan, Trina Menino, and Anna Muto. Ben Walsh is our reporter, Mariangel Gonzalez is our project manager, and Lucy Woods is head of research. Megan Dean is programming manager, and Ryan Ho is design lead. Golda Arthur is our showrunner, and Bradley Hope and Tom Wright are executive producers. Our marketing consultant is Maggie Taylor, and I'm Amy Keene. Thanks for listening.